There are celebrity weddings. There are historic weddings. And then there are moments that seem to stop an entire culture in its tracks. According to the source, that moment came when Travis Kelce stood before Taylor Swift, took her hand, and delivered a vow so emotional that Taylor could no longer hold back her tears. The room had been quiet. Family members were watching. Friends were watching. Some of the biggest names in entertainment, sports, and music were watching. And then Travis dropped to one knee. Not because he was proposing. That had already happened years earlier. This time, he was making a different kind of promise. A promise to spend the rest of his life beside Taylor. A promise that reportedly left Taylor crying at the altar, while members of both families struggled to hold back their own emotions. And then, almost immediately, the silence disappeared. From somewhere inside the ceremony came the words, "Kiss, kiss, kiss." Within seconds, the entire room was joining in. And suddenly, what had started as one of the most intimate moments of the wedding became something joyful, loud, and unmistakably Travis and Taylor. But there is something important to understand about this story. The exact wedding vows attributed to Taylor Swift and Travis Kelce have not been publicly released as a verified transcript. Several specific lines circulating online are presented in the source as descriptions or second-hand accounts, rather than an official recording or published copy of their vows. So as we walk through this story, we have to separate what the source describes from what has been officially confirmed. And that distinction actually makes the emotional story even more interesting. Because beneath all the celebrity spectacle, the cameras, the famous guests, the fashion, and the enormous attention, the story described here is surprisingly simple. Two people stood in front of the people they love and promised to build a life together. And for Taylor Swift, a woman whose entire career has been shaped by the language of love, heartbreak, uncertainty, and finding something worth holding on to, that moment carries a weight that goes far beyond a wedding ceremony. This is the story of the vows, the tears, the families, the unbelievable setting, and the moment Taylor and Travis reportedly turned one of the world's most famous arenas into something that felt remarkably personal. And if you love following every chapter of Taylor's journey, you're in the right place. This is Taylor Timeline, where we look beyond the headline and follow the moments that define each era of Taylor Swift's life. Because this wasn't simply another celebrity event. According to the source, this was the moment an enormously public love story became a marriage. And the most emotional part happened when the crowd went completely silent. To understand why the ceremony reportedly moved so many people, you have to go back to the beginning. Not to the wedding. Not to the altar. Not even to the engagement. But to the moment when Travis Kelce first tried to get Taylor Swift's attention. The story has become part of modern pop culture history. Travis had attended one of Taylor's concerts during the Eras tour. And according to the account that later became famous through his podcast, he wanted to give Taylor a friendship bracelet containing his phone number. He didn't get the chance. Taylor never received the bracelet from him that night. For most people, that would have been the end of the story. But it wasn't. That missed opportunity became the beginning of one of the most watched celebrity relationships in the world. By the summer of 2023, Taylor and Travis had become a subject of enormous public fascination. Then came the football games, the stadium suites, the cameras, the celebrations. Taylor watching the Kansas City Chiefs. Travis talking about Taylor. Taylor appearing in a world that had previously been associated primarily with football rather than pop music. And almost immediately, something became clear. This relationship was not going to happen in complete secrecy. The world was going to watch. Millions of fans watched Taylor's reactions from stadium boxes. They watched Travis play. They watched their families interact. They watched the relationship develop through photographs, broadcasts, public appearances, and increasingly important milestones. But what made the wedding story particularly striking is that, according to the source, the couple ultimately tried to protect the ceremony itself. That contrast matters. Their relationship had become one of the most visible romances on the planet. Yet when the time came to make their most important promises, they reportedly wanted the actual ceremony to remain personal. The source describes strict security measures and non-disclosure agreements surrounding the wedding. Guests were reportedly cautious about confirming their attendance. And that tells us something about the difference between being publicly known and publicly exposed. Taylor Swift has spent nearly 2 decades living at the intersection of fame and privacy. She knows that some moments can be shared with millions of people while other moments become more meaningful precisely because they belong only to the people inside the room. And according to the source, the wedding managed to balance both. It was enormous, but it was also intimate. It had celebrities, but it also had family. It had the spectacle of Madison Square Garden, but it reportedly still felt like a gathering of people who knew the bride and groom before the headlines did. And then there was the setting. Madison Square Garden, a place associated with enormous concerts, legendary athletes, major sporting events, and some of the biggest performances in the world. For Taylor Swift, the location carried an obvious connection to her career. For Travis Kelce, it represented another kind of arena. But according to descriptions from guests cited in the source, the couple transformed that famous venue into something almost unrecognizable. A garden. A secret garden. A private world hidden inside one of New York's most famous buildings. And that symbolism is difficult to ignore. Because Taylor's music has repeatedly returned to the idea of private spaces, hidden feelings, secret gardens, and worlds that exist beyond the public eye. The source suggests that the decor may have been a quiet nod to those themes. Whether every detail was intentionally connected to Taylor's songwriting or not, the image itself is powerful. Thousands of people outside. One carefully protected world inside. And at the center of it all, Taylor Swift and Travis Kelce. Imagine walking into Madison Square Garden and discovering that the arena you know has disappeared. Instead of the familiar sports and concert atmosphere, guests reportedly entered a space filled with illuminated trees, oversized photographs, flowers, and an atmosphere designed to feel almost like a secret garden. The source describes enormous photographs of Taylor and Travis at different ages. That detail is especially meaningful, because weddings are usually about one day. But photographs of childhood, adolescence, early careers, family memories, and old versions of the bride and groom tell a much bigger story. They remind everyone that before Taylor became Taylor Swift, she was someone's daughter. Before Travis became an NFL superstar, he was someone's son. Before there were stadiums and Grammy Awards and Super Bowl celebrations, there were ordinary family moments. The wedding, at least according to the source's descriptions, brought those different timelines together. Taylor's journey, Travis's journey, their families, their careers, and the relationship that connected them. Guests reportedly received custom lace handkerchiefs embroidered with the couple's initials and the wedding date. It sounds like a small detail, but at a ceremony where so many people were apparently crying, it turned out to be a surprisingly appropriate gift. Because the tears were not limited to the bride and groom. According to the source, members of both families became emotional during the vows. Taylor's mother, Andrea Swift, was reportedly seen with a handkerchief. Her father, Scott Swift, was described as visibly moved. On Travis's side, Donna Kelce reportedly cried as well. And Jason Kelce, who has become one of the most recognizable members of the Kelce family in his own right, was described as deeply emotional watching his brother. These reactions matter because the wedding was not just the conclusion of a celebrity romance. For the families, it represented something far more personal. They were watching their children enter a new stage of life. And perhaps that's why the biggest stars in the room suddenly mattered less than the people sitting closest to the altar. Because no matter how famous the guest list became, this was still a family event. A daughter getting married. A son getting married. Two families becoming one. And then Travis began his vows. According to the source, Travis did something unexpected. He didn't simply stand beside Taylor and read from a prepared page. He took her hands. And at one point, he lowered himself to one knee. Again, this was not a proposal. That chapter had already happened. This was something symbolic. A gesture of devotion. The source describes Travis looking up at Taylor as he delivered an emotional promise about protecting her. One line attributed to the ceremony has become the emotional centerpiece of the story. "I swear to protect you with my soul, with my life, and everything I have, forever." But this is where we need to be careful. The source itself acknowledges that the couple have not released their written vows publicly, and that no verified transcript exists. So rather than treating every circulating sentence as an officially confirmed quotation, the safer conclusion is that guests described Travis's vows as deeply personal, emotional, and centered on the life he wanted to build with Taylor. And according to those descriptions, Taylor was overwhelmed. Her tears reportedly began during Travis's vows. Not a single dramatic tear for the cameras. The source describes a much more emotional reaction. The kind of crying that happens when someone is trying to listen, smile, breathe, and take in everything happening at once. And that image feels especially powerful when you consider Taylor's career. Taylor Swift has spent years writing about love. She has written about first love, young love, lost love, complicated love, love that survived, love that didn't. She has written songs about wondering whether someone will stay, about being afraid to lose someone, about wanting permanence in a life where almost everything changes. Her fans have followed those stories across eras. They've watched her transform personal experiences into music. And now, according to the source, Taylor was standing at an altar listening to the man she chose describe the life he wanted with her. For once, she wasn't the person searching for the words. Someone else was speaking them to her. And that reversal is part of what makes the scene so emotionally resonant. Taylor is one of the most celebrated songwriters in the world. She has built an extraordinary career from her ability to articulate emotions that other people struggle to explain. But at this moment, according to the account, she was simply the bride. Listening, crying, holding Travis's hand, and letting the moment happen. The cameras and headlines tend to focus on Taylor and Travis. But weddings are rarely only about the couple. And the source's descriptions of the family reactions may be among the most revealing details of the entire story. Andrea Swift and Scott Swift have watched Taylor's entire journey. They were there before the stadiums, before the world knew her name, before the awards, before the eras. They watched their daughter grow from a young aspiring musician into one of the most recognizable people on the planet. So seeing her standing at the altar would inevitably carry decades of emotion. On Travis's side, Donna Kelce has also witnessed an extraordinary transformation. She watched her son grow into an NFL star. She watched him win championships. She watched his relationship with Taylor become one of the most discussed stories in sports and entertainment. And now she was watching him become a husband. Jason Kelce's presence added another layer. For years, Jason and Travis have shared one of the most recognizable sibling relationships in professional sports. Their podcast turned their family dynamic into entertainment for millions of people. Fans have watched them joke with each other, tease each other, talk about football, and celebrate each other's achievements. So seeing Jason standing beside Travis as his best man reportedly created a deeply personal family moment. This is one of the reasons the wedding described in the source doesn't feel like just another celebrity spectacle. The famous people were there. But the emotional center was still family. And then came another major detail. Taylor reportedly did not have a traditional bridal party. Instead, her brother Austin stood beside her as her man of honor. Travis chose his brother Jason as his best man. It was a simple decision with a powerful message. When everything else becomes enormous, go back to the people who knew you before any of it happened. That seems to be exactly what happened here. Then there was the person standing at the center of the ceremony. Adam Sandler. The choice reportedly made sense because of his connection to Travis and his family. Sandler had worked with Travis, including his appearance in Happy Gilmore 2, and the relationship apparently developed beyond a professional connection. That made him a fascinating choice for the wedding. Because Adam Sandler isn't the traditional celebrity wedding officiant people might have expected. But according to guests cited in the source, he brought something the couple wanted. Humor, warmth, heart, and personality. One guest described the ceremony as moving while still allowing Sandler to be funny. That balance matters. Because Taylor and Travis are two people whose public images often occupy very different worlds. Taylor is associated with songwriting, performance, storytelling, and carefully constructed eras. Travis is associated with football, locker room humor, competitive energy, and an enormous personality. Their relationship has always worked partly because of that contrast. And according to the source, the ceremony reflected it. There was emotion. There was seriousness. There was humor. There were tears. And then there was laughter. It wasn't presented as a perfectly polished Hollywood production. Instead, it reportedly felt like two people bringing their personalities into one ceremony. And perhaps that is why the vows reportedly lasted so long. Guests described each set of vows as lasting around 20 minutes. 20 minutes is a long time to speak at a wedding. Especially when everyone in the room is waiting. Especially when every word carries enormous emotional weight. But if those descriptions are accurate, Taylor and Travis didn't treat the vows as a formality. They treated them as the heart of the ceremony. And then came the moment that transformed the atmosphere. The vows ended. The room had reportedly been quiet. People were emotional. And then someone shouted, "Kiss!" Another voice joined. Then another. Soon the entire room was chanting, "Kiss! Kiss! Kiss!" It's hard to imagine a more fitting bridge between the two worlds Taylor and Travis inhabit. A Taylor Swift wedding brings the emotional intensity of a Swiftie crowd. A Travis Kelce wedding brings the energy of a football stadium. And somehow, according to the source, both energies collided inside the ceremony. The chant grew louder. Travis reportedly laughed. Taylor was still emotional. And then they kissed. For years, the public had watched their relationship through screens. Through stadium broadcasts. Through photographs. Through red carpets. Through snippets of conversations. Through fan theories and endless online discussion. But a wedding kiss is different. It isn't about a new relationship beginning. It's about a commitment becoming official. And that is why the scene reportedly carried so much emotional weight. The couple who once had a missed friendship bracelet exchange were now standing in front of their families, friends, and some of the biggest names in the world. And the room was cheering for them. Not as celebrities, but as a couple. Of course, there was no way a wedding involving Taylor Swift and Travis Kelce could have an ordinary guest list. The source describes roughly 1,000 attendees. And the names were extraordinary. Steven Spielberg, Gigi Hadid, Bradley Cooper, Dakota Johnson, Hugh Grant, Jennifer Lopez, Jimmy Fallon, Zoe Kravitz, Tom Hanks, Paul McCartney. Those names alone could make the event feel like an awards show. But then there were the people connected to Taylor personally. Selena Gomez, Lena Dunham, Karlie Kloss. And on the football side, familiar names from Travis's world. Kansas City connections. NFL figures. Coaches. Broadcasters. Friends. Family. Yet one of the most interesting observations from the source was that despite the celebrity-heavy guest list, the wedding reportedly felt surprisingly intimate. That contrast is important. Because imagine being seated beside one of the world's biggest actors, musicians, athletes, or entertainers. And then, somewhere nearby, you have someone's high school friend. Someone who knew the bride before she became famous. Someone who remembers Travis before the NFL. That mix creates something different. It prevents the event from becoming only a celebrity gathering. It makes it feel like a real wedding. Just one happening on an extraordinary scale. One of the most intriguing details in the source is the garden theme. The arena was reportedly transformed into a secret garden. And for longtime Taylor Swift fans, that phrase carries a certain emotional resonance. Taylor's songwriting has repeatedly used imagery of hidden spaces, private worlds, nature, gardens, and places where love can exist away from public attention. So a garden inside Madison Square Garden becomes more than decoration. It becomes symbolism. Outside those walls was the world. The headlines. The cameras. The fans. The internet. The endless commentary. Inside was the garden. A space created for Taylor and Travis. A place where they could stand together without needing to perform their relationship for anyone. That may be the most interesting paradox of their entire romance. Their love story became public almost immediately. Yet the deeper it became, the more valuable privacy appeared to become. The wedding reportedly reflected that. Even with hundreds of famous people in attendance, the couple reportedly created a world within the world. And perhaps that is why the secret garden imagery feels so appropriate. A relationship can be famous without becoming entirely public. A love story can be watched without every part of it being available. And after years of having the public analyze almost every chapter of her personal life, Taylor may have wanted the wedding to belong first to the people standing inside the room. Then there was the dress. According to the source, Taylor wore a custom Christian Dior haute couture gown designed under the house's new creative direction. And when you think about Taylor's relationship with fashion, this wasn't simply a dress. Taylor's fashion has always been connected to storytelling. Different eras, different colors, different silhouettes, different versions of herself. The woman who walked onto a red carpet in one era might look completely different from the woman who performed on stage in another. But a wedding dress carries a different meaning. It doesn't represent an album. It doesn't represent a character. It represents a person. Taylor Swift, not the performer. Taylor Swift, the bride. And that's why the ceremony's emotional details matter more than the fashion itself. The dress could be spectacular. The venue could be enormous. The guest list could be historic. But the defining image, according to the source, was still Taylor crying as Travis spoke to her. Because at that point, nothing else mattered. Not the cameras. Not the headlines. Not the fashion. Not the fame. Just the two people standing there. And then came one of the most meaningful details outside the ceremony itself. According to the source, Taylor and Travis donated $26 million across 20 local and national charities before the wedding. The funds were reportedly directed toward children's hospitals, food banks, and music programs in places important to the couple, including New York, Kansas City, Nashville, and Rhode Island. If accurate, that decision adds another dimension to the wedding. Because it would have been easy for an event this enormous to become completely inward-looking. A celebration focused entirely on the bride and groom. Instead, the source describes the couple using the occasion to give something back. And those locations are significant. New York is deeply connected to Taylor's life and career. Kansas City is central to Travis's professional world. Nashville is woven into Taylor's earliest musical history. Rhode Island has also become closely associated with Taylor's personal life. So the gesture reportedly connected the different chapters of their lives. Music, football, family, home, career, and community. It turned the wedding from an isolated celebration into something with an outward impact. And for fans who have followed Taylor for years, that may be one of the details that stays with them long after the photographs fade. Now step back for a moment. Look at the entire timeline. A friendship bracelet. A missed connection. A podcast story. A football game. A stadium appearance. A relationship. A year of public fascination. An engagement. And now, according to the source, a wedding. That's an extraordinary arc. Especially because neither person could have known where the first missed connection would eventually lead. When Travis talked publicly about wanting to meet Taylor, he couldn't have known that millions of people would eventually watch them become one of the world's most famous couples. Taylor couldn't have known that a football player's unsuccessful attempt to hand her a bracelet would eventually become part of the story of her marriage. And yet here they reportedly are. Standing at an altar. Surrounded by family. Making promises. It's the kind of full-circle moment that almost seems written for a movie. Except this isn't a fictional romantic storyline we're analyzing. It's a story that has unfolded through real public moments over several years. And that's why fans have become so emotionally invested. They didn't simply discover the relationship after it was already established. They watched it evolve. They watched Travis enter Taylor's world. They watched Taylor become part of his. And now they are watching the two worlds become one family. There is one question that will inevitably follow Taylor into this new chapter. What's next? Because Taylor Swift has never been someone who stays still creatively for very long. Every chapter seems to become material for another chapter. Every era creates questions about the next. And now fans are naturally wondering what marriage will mean for her music. The source mentions speculation that new music may not be far away. But speculation is exactly what it is. There is no need to turn a possibility into a promise. Taylor's creative process belongs to Taylor. If she writes about marriage, fans will hear it. If she takes time away, fans will notice that too. If she surprises everyone with an entirely different direction, that will become another chapter in her story. What makes this moment interesting is not predicting what she will do. It's recognizing that Taylor is entering a stage of her life that she has spent years imagining through songs. For much of her career, love was something she described from different angles. Sometimes it was exciting. Sometimes terrifying. Sometimes temporary. Sometimes permanent. Now she has lived through enough eras to understand that relationships don't exist in one emotional state. They evolve. They change. They require patience. They require trust. They require two people choosing each other repeatedly. And that is what makes the wedding so significant. It isn't the end of Taylor's love story. It's the beginning of another chapter. Perhaps the most important detail isn't the famous guests. It isn't the venue. It isn't the dress. It isn't even the kiss. It's the reported decision to make the vows personal. Taylor and Travis reportedly wrote their own vows. They reportedly read them from small personal books. And according to guest descriptions, they took their time. That matters. Because when the entire world already knows who you are, the most meaningful thing you can give each other may be something nobody else gets to hear. The internet wants everything. Every photograph. Every quote. Every detail. Every reaction. Every word. But a wedding is one of those rare moments where some things can remain private. And the source itself acknowledges that the actual written vows have not been publicly verified. That means there is still a boundary. A line between what the guests experienced and what the public knows. And perhaps that is exactly how it should be. Taylor has spent much of her adult life turning private emotions into public art. But not every emotion has to become a lyric. Not every promise has to become a headline. Some promises can belong only to the two people who make them. There have been countless Taylor Swift headlines. There have been countless Travis Kelce headlines. There have been moments that dominated television. Moments that broke the internet. Taylor Swift has spent almost 2 decades writing about the search for something lasting. She has written about the thrill of finding someone. The fear of losing them. The pain of watching something beautiful disappear. The hope that maybe, someday, something would stay. And perhaps that is why this moment feels so symbolic. Because after all the eras, all the songs, all the headlines, all the speculation, and all the years of growing up in front of the world, Taylor reached a moment where she didn't have to write the ending herself. She simply had to stand there and listen. Listen to the person she chose. Listen to the promise being made. Listen to the people she loved cheering around her. And according to the source, she cried. Not because the moment was sad, but because sometimes happiness is overwhelming too. Travis Kelce's most emotional promise reportedly wasn't about fame. It wasn't about football. It wasn't about being one of the most famous couples alive. It was about being there. About protection. About commitment. About forever. And that may be the most powerful thing about this entire story. The world has spent years watching Taylor Swift become bigger. Bigger stages. Bigger tours. Bigger records. Bigger headlines. But the wedding described here was about something completely different. It was about making her world smaller. Not smaller in importance. Smaller in intimacy. A room full of people she trusted. A hand she could hold. A family beside her. A person promising to stay. And perhaps that is the real meaning behind the secret garden. A private place inside a very public life. A place where the superstar could simply be Taylor. And where Travis could simply be Travis. No stadium. No scoreboard. No album chart. No performance. Just a promise. So when the crowd shouted, "Kiss, kiss, kiss," it wasn't simply a playful wedding tradition. It was the celebration of everything that had brought them to that moment. The missed bracelet. The first public appearances. The football games. The cameras. The laughter. The pressure. The speculation. The years of growing together. And finally, the vows. A story that began with one person trying to get the other's attention had reportedly arrived at a place neither of them could have predicted that night. Marriage. And maybe the most beautiful part is that this isn't the final chapter. For Taylor Swift, there is always another era. Another song. Another story. Another page. But this time, according to the source, she isn't walking into that next chapter alone. She has someone beside her. Someone whose hand she can hold. Someone who has promised to stand there through whatever comes next. And if the tears, the laughter, the families, and the love described by those who witnessed the ceremony are any indication, this may be one chapter Swifties remember for a very long time. Because some Taylor Swift eras are defined by an album. Some are defined by a song. Some are defined by a tour. But this one may simply be defined by a promise. A promise to stay. And for everyone who has followed Taylor's journey from the beginning, that's a beautiful place to begin again. If you've been here through every era, every heartbreak, every comeback, every record, and now this extraordinary new chapter, make sure you're subscribed to Taylor Timeline. Because the story doesn't stop at the wedding. It only changes. And whatever Taylor Swift's next era looks like, we'll be here to follow it with you. This is Taylor Timeline. And this is only the beginning.